All right. So yeah, thanks everyone. Excited to talk to you. So yeah, my name is Sam, and like Knut said, I'm the director of technology at The Gist. We're a sports media company, and I'm excited to talk through today our journey with Sanity. We've been using Sanity for a little over a year, and just would kind of like to walk you through what the process of finding Sanity was like, why we chose Sanity, and some of the cool things that we've been able to do with it. So first off, I just want to explain a bit about who we are. What is The Gist? It's a sports media startup, and our mission is to level the playing field in sports. So we are all about making sports more accessible and inclusive to all types of sports fans. And we do this by creating sports content that centers women's voices, and it provides equal coverage of women's and men's sports. So just as much as you'll hear us talk about the WNBA, The Gist will also provide equal coverage of the NBA, for example. Our content and mission has resonated with a lot of people, and we've grown our community to over 1 million people across our various content channels. And these are our content channels. So we have social media accounts, TikTok, Instagram. We have a weekly podcast. We have our website. But our main thing and our primary content channel is our email newsletter. So there we have almost 1 million subscribers just in the newsletters alone. We have 3 different newsletters, sports business, regular sports news, and college sports. And we send those newsletters out 4 days a week. So that's my little pitch for The Gist. If you want to check our website out, thegistsports.com, please do subscribe. We'd love to have more subscribers join our community. So, now that I've talked a bit about that, and with that in mind, I just want to kind of talk about what our newsletter night or our newsletter process looked like before we used Sanity, to kind of paint a picture of why we needed Sanity. So our content team, the night before we send out our newsletter, the newsletters go out in the morning, they would get together in a Google Doc. It'd be a highly collaborative process with 10 plus people all writing, editing, fact-checking each other's stories. Once the newsletter was basically done, then one person would move it into our email publishing tools. That's this Campaign Monitor step here. Campaign Monitor allows you to build emails, send them out to people, manage your list and segments of users as well. Then that email, once it's all done and it's created in Campaign Monitor, it gets it sent out the next morning. And then after that, someone on the content team will go into the newsletter. They would open it up in their email, and they would copy and paste those stories into the CMS to be published on the website. So there's a lot of manual copying and pasting that was going on before Sanity. You had the Google Doc, you had copying and pasting into Campaign Monitor, you had copying and pasting from the email into the CMS for the website. And we were also, when it came to actually building the email template, this was the kind of like WYSIWYG tool that was used inside Campaign Monitor. So you've got your content on the right-hand side there. You have some fields that you can enter when you click on a particular component on the left-hand side, some rich text boxes. You can see here there's like an image asset you can upload, so you could expose certain things. But there were a lot of challenges with that. It wasn't a great experience. So for one, you couldn't copy and paste from Google Docs. You would lose your formatting, so you had to use a Google Docs plugin, convert it to Markdown, then paste it inside. And then anything complicated, like these buttons here for question of the day, these would require actually the content team to go in and modify HTML, and you can see the source piece here. So we were asking content people with zero experience with HTML, hey, you've got to go click source, and if you want to update the content of those buttons, there wasn't really another way to do that or just expose specific variables. You were really limited in kind of the customization you were able to do. So it's a big pain for the content team, but on top of that, it was a big pain for the development team, because these design templates that the emails were created around are these giant files with a ton of repetitive code. So you can see one here that's 4,200 lines long, and it has a ton of repetitive code in it. So There's markup within Campaign Monitor to regionalize things based on people. So you can see cities, for example, if you're in Chicago, if you're in LA, if you're in Dallas, you can see different specific content. But there was no good way to componentize that. It just had to be in this massive file with repetitive lines. So maintaining that was obviously a bit of a nightmare. And there wasn't just one template. There was templates for the 3 different newsletter verticals, special editions, Olympics, one-off emails, probably about 15 in total. So you can see how like between the content team and the tech team and all the stuff we had to keep track of, we kind of were feeling like this. This manual repetitive way of publishing content, it just didn't work well for our newsletter stories. So we needed to figure out a way to connect everything and be able to publish from one central source. So to fix this, we started a project in early 2023, and our goal was to distribute our content from one source. So no more copying and pasting, no more manually setting things up in multiple places. But whatever the solution was going to be at the center, we obviously needed a flexible and customizable CMS. So of course, it's no one's surprise after evaluating all the headless CMSs on the market, the choice was clearly Sanity. And the customizability and the developer experience was definitely a big thing. The responsiveness of the Sanity team and the community was definitely a big thing to be able to go and put in GitHub issues, message people on Slack and get responses and feedback really quickly. But what really got me was the real-time collaboration in the studio. I feel like that's the bread and butter of Sanity, and for us, it just really resonated because of that. Going back to the Google Doc experience I was talking about, 10 plus content editors on any given night working together, it just seemed like a really great fit, and I was really excited about making this something that our team could use. So we got to work on making that happen, and the starting point, and I felt like the best way as someone kind of just finding out about Sanity and jumping in without really knowing it, to learn it, was to create the content model for our website specifically, because we had a website already built with Gatsby, and we're already using another headless CMS. It was really just a matter of unplugging the old CMS and plugging in the Sanity as a new content source. So of course, it wasn't a one-to-one copying over of schemas. There was a ton of room for optimizing, as there is when you accumulate technical debt over time. So there was a process there. It was a good process for us ultimately to go through, regardless if we were going to go to Sanity or not, but it was a great opportunity to do that in replatforming CMSs. And then, we always, of course, because the point of this was to use Sanity as a single data source for multiple different of our content channels, we just wanted to make sure to consider the schemas that would be shared with the newsletter, such as the actual stories. So this is an example of a web version of the story and just a little screenshot of the Sanity Studio for that particular story. I'll go into kind of a bit of a demo when we get to the newsletter part of it of what our Sanity Studio actually looks like. But even though the schema wasn't fully figured out for the newsletter portion of it, just roughing in certain pieces that would allow us to kind of expand on that without undoing any of our previous work was kind of the goal of this first step. So the biggest part of this project, obviously, once that was done, we had some content models, some schemas set up for the website, was figuring out the newsletters. So at a high level, we have Campaign Monitor that sends our emails. Fortunately, they have an API that allows you to create your emails that you're going to send, among other things, which is really handy for this use case, because instead of writing the email content in their WYSIWYG editor, we wanted to be able to build it seamlessly inside Sanity. We wanted to be able to render the HTML of the email using some reusable components, inject that Sanity content in, and then publish from Sanity directly into Campaign Monitor through their API and custom document actions. So the question was, what does that connection between Sanity and Campaign Monitor look like? And that was a big undertaking. That was kind of the main aspect of this project of us kind of transitioning to Sanity. And so we came up with this idea of the engine. So the engine was essentially a Node.js application that included that component library of these reusable components for the newsletter. It had a rendering engine for the email HTML that, like I said, takes Sanity and the components from the engine itself. And then it exposed an endpoint that we could call from Sanity to publish to Campaign Monitor with their API. So that was the general idea. The starting point there, I'll go into kind of like what that actually looks like, a campaign or a newsletter inside our instance of Sanity Studio. But I wanted to just talk quickly about the visual components of the newsletters and how we did them. So they were written using good old handlebars. Used because it was nice and simple, and especially because there is no JavaScript allowed in email HTML. It didn't make sense to use something like React. It seemed like a bit of overkill at best. And side note for anyone that hasn't developed HTML for email but knows their HTML, you might be wondering why I'm using tables for layouts and inline CSS. It's not fun developing HTML for email, but you got to do what you got to do. So that is, a handlebar component on the side, and then I'm showing on the right-hand side here Storybook, which we use to create a component library. If anyone's not familiar with Storybook, it's a great tool for being able to test your UI components and plug in different parameters to them and see how it affects them. So that was really helpful for the building process, but also as we maintain these components and need to make changes, just validating that they work in all use cases, because we can very easily and quickly test them within this library format. So with that, I want to jump out of presentation. I want to jump out of this presentation. I'm going to show you how this is all wired within Sanity. So I've got to. Sorry, bear with me for a second. Here we go. Here we go. Cool. So this is our Sanity Studio, and this is our campaign or newsletter view for our emails. So essentially, I mean, it's the concept overall is relatively straightforward, that we have some evergreen components of a newsletter, like the header, the footer, this intro piece here, and those will pull particular elements out of specific fields within that document. And actually in Storybook here, just for the purposes of documenting it, you can see very specifically like where you would go under the content type to like what parameter on the HTML component or the handlebars component is tied to what field in particular in inside Sanity. So there's some of those evergreen components that just are there, but there's the main content area, which is an array of different objects that you can create and move around. So it allows for like a really flexible, customizable experience of generating your newsletter. And then in terms of creating a new newsletter, obviously there's templates that we can do to kind of get our team off to a quicker start by having blank versions of some of these items in here if we know we have 2 national news stories for every particular newsletter, and then we have a regional story for all of our US cities, which you can see here. And so and then kind of on the code side, I won't go into detail of kind of how the renderer works for all of these, but you can see just there's this function in Node that goes top to bottom, and it just appends to this campaign content like the HTML for the actual newsletter. And then at the end, it can store it and have it be accessible at a particular endpoint, which is, as you can see here on the preview pane, basically it's hosted on DigitalOcean, is the campaigns path. And then we're using the ID of the Sanity document. So if you go to that URL, you're able to pull up the rendered newsletter. One decision we made from an architecture standpoint was on request of actually, you go to this endpoint and you want to pull up the actual newsletter HTML. to throw the Sanity content into a database that's stored in DigitalOcean and request it from there as opposed to making multiple API requests directly to Sanity. We just decided that would probably be more performant. So that was our kind of decision there. And in order to sync the database with the content from Sanity, we basically used webhooks to say when any particular content that was relevant to a newsletter was being published or updated, then send it and update it in the database so it just was available there immediately. Yeah, that generally is how the newsletter is set up. You can see, articles are obviously a reference to another content type, and then there's options in here to publish to website or a campaign or both. We're updating the document actions to make that language very clear on a given article. So it says using campaign, but if it's both, it's website publish / using campaign, and I'm also exposing different fields that are needed for the website that aren't needed for the campaign. So that, just a bit about kind of the key part of that, which is the reusable content across multiple platforms. One thing I do want to point out here as well, so we're not using visual editing. The timing of us launching this was November 2023, so it was like exactly when Sanity talked about visual editing coming out. We thought about it afterwards, like, do we want to convert to that? The paradigm of an email and it not being a navigable experience like a website kind of made it hard for us to think about how we might sync that up. Would love to hear any feedback or thoughts on that if you got any ideas. But we felt like this side-by-side preview in the iframe worked well. There was one hiccup with it though. Not hiccup, but like just a complication as part of the process is that basically if you have it auto-updating this preview pane when you make changes, it would refresh the iframe, and when you refresh an iframe, it scrolls you all the way back up to the top. So our content team would be editing their newsletter, they'd be making changes, they'd want to see how it looks, and they say, oh, I gotta scroll down every single time I'm making changes. So I did something kind of hacky to get around that, and I will show that right now. I'll do a little demo here, actually, there's an old version of it in here. So when I do an update there, you can see it disappeared. It's thinking for a little bit. It should pop up again there with the test Sanity there. It didn't move. So how did it not how did it not scroll back up to the top and refresh the screen? Well, I basically took the iframe plugin, I forked it, and I added this small modification to it I'm using the source doc attribute on an iframe instead of the source attribute. So if anyone's familiar with source attribute, would just be the URL you want to show in the iframe. Source doc is actually the HTML. You can just put the straight up HTML in there, and with that, it doesn't refresh the view. So I'm fetching the URL in the background. I'm grabbing all the HTML content to it, and then I'm shoving it inside the source doc every time I change it. So it is hacky, but it works. So, and the team was happy with it, so I said, good, we'll go with that. So yeah, that's how we kind of figured that out. And then the last thing I want to show is just kind of how it all comes together in terms of actually publishing into Campaign Monitor. So I've got my email done, I'm ready to send it out. I can pick the lists and the segments within lists that I want to send to. That's actually pulled from Campaign Monitor's API and populated in a field that I can configure inside Sanity. And then I click Publish to Campaign Monitor. And what happens is it's calling that endpoint, like I mentioned, that I've exposed within the engine. That endpoint's calling Campaign Monitor. It's saying I've got a new campaign that I want to create. And then once it's successfully created, it actually passes back the ID of that campaign, and it allows us to store it back into the Sanity document. And what I can do there is create a field that's a Campaign Monitor reference, and you also saw that pop up there with a link. And I can store the ID of the campaign. That allows me to just click to view it, and then when I click to view it, it's all there and I don't have to go and like log into Campaign Monitor separately to see it. So it was a nice, I mean, just the ability to use custom document actions to make a process like that really seamless for our team was really nice. And then from here, you can kind of just give it a gut check. Does it all look good? Maybe do a preview that you send to yourself, and then send it out to all your subscribers. And that's kind of the end of it. But the whole process of building the email itself lives inside Sanity here. And that has worked really well for our team. Right. And that's that demo. So I'm going to jump back into my presentation, if I can remember the hotkey. Let's see. Cool, kind of. There we go. Okay. So a couple other things that we did outside of the newsletters that were really automating and improving efficiency for us. We host contests on our website. So those are free to enter giveaways where you submit your email and we track all the different entrants in Campaign Monitor. So we use that API to send your information to Campaign Monitor, and then we'll also add you to our newsletter list if you sign up as well. But the process of setting that up was kind of this, again, going into multiple different platforms and manually setting things up. You had to go create a landing page for the contest in the website CMS. You had to go manually create the list for the contest in Campaign Monitor. And then we used Zapier to create a zap for every new contest list that took new entrants in the contest list, and if they weren't already in our newsletter list, move them in there. So there were all these kind of like disjointed things you had to connect together and do manually. Afterwards, we were able to just create a contest in Sanity, and then again, use those custom document actions. So have an endpoint within our engine that while the page is actually publishing in Sanity and triggering a deploy for our website, is calling the engine, and it's creating that new listing Campaign Monitor through the API. And it's also ensuring that new entrants automatically get added to the newsletter list, all just straight from Sanity and all just clicking publish. So you don't have to worry about all these other manual setup things. Podcast publishing, another thing that was sped up through our use of Sanity. It's kind of the reverse where, the first thing that happens is the podcast gets published on the streaming platforms. But what we were able to do instead of manually creating the new podcast episode on the website each time was have a cron job on our engine that checked for new episodes with an API. And if there was a new episode, it could create a new Sanity document through their API and pull in the episode number, title, description, all those things like that. And then someone would just have to go in and add the website specific things like this image and publish it. And it was a lot more of a frictionless experience. So we trained our newsletter team up. We trained our content team up on Sanity all last November, and things were fully up and running. And I was worried because change is hard for people, and I thought this is great, but I don't know how people are going to feel about this. I was nervous about the reception, but the reception was pretty amazing. I got a couple Slack messages up here that I received afterwards. So a lot was about how much time it saved. You can see there was 75% reductions kind of in the time saved by some of our content team and the things they were doing 4 days a week. Sanity gets called Samity within the gist, so that's a nickname I'll take. And we can also see that Sanity is definitely a sleigh. So this was a great success, and everyone adopted it really quickly and loved it. There's still so much more we want to do, though. Truthfully, our team still writes our newsletter in the Google Docs, and I'm obviously very eager to get everything happening within the Sanity ecosystem. We're still trying to figure out one thing is suggest edits, and that's a really valuable tool for our team in Google Docs. So figuring out what the equivalent would be inside Sanity. But all the new things coming out with tasks and comments and Sanity Create as well, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, are super exciting, and I think are getting us to that point where we can be inside the Sanity ecosystem and have kind of that dream of everything happening there. And one other thing I'll plug quickly, because this is what I've been working on for the last couple months, is our bracket challenge. So a bracket challenge is a free-to-play tournament where you pick for the playoffs of any league or March Madness or the World Cup. You go in and you pick what you think is going to happen. The top most accurate brackets get prizes. So our plan is to, again, have the engine deal with the actual data and logic behind the bracket results and scoring and all those things and the user data. But with the flexibility of Sanity, our plan is to build a customization in so that you can actually modify that data within Studio, within a content type that deals with more presentation level things that we would do in Sanity, like the landing page for a bracket challenge and things like that. So yeah, it's exciting that we have that opportunity to keep everything in Sanity, even as the complexity of the types of applications that we're building are growing and maybe even necessitating the data being stored outside. We can still use Sanity Studio as a user interface for all of those things. So with that, that's all I really have. And I just wanted to say thank you to the Sanity team for making me look so good at my job. Thank you for all the amazing work that you do to make it a better and better CMS. And thank you all for listening.